Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources Podcast, the BERcast. We are back with Season 2, Episode 1. I know y'all missed us. We are going to be talking about the outcome of the national election here in the United States. What does that portend for the future of the energy efficiency industry? Are we at risk? Is all the progress that we made on a federal level going to be rolled back? We'll find out. We're going to be speaking with a couple of esteemed colleagues from the ACEEE and NAIMA. But going ahead into episode 1 of a new season, I'm feeling pretty good today. The sun is out shining. You're going to see it on my face a little bit here. We actually have some sun here in Detroit in November. Not a whole lot of cold weather yet. Not a snowflake to be seen. People say, we don't have anything to worry about, but I'll tell you what, it's nice and warm and comfortable out here in Detroit in November, and that is not normal. It is what it is. I guess we'll have to see how things continue to develop. You all might have noticed that we have some new tunes for the show, new intro. That's right. We have our house band, Ghost Garden, from Detroit, Michigan. That's right. That's my band, people. We had some music that we put out we recorded it in the fall, but we've been layering it out there on the interwebs on your favorite streaming services. Over this past summer, we'll actually have a couple more tunes coming out here very soon. So feel free to look us up, Ghost Garden. We're on Bandcamp and Spotify and all the rest of that good stuff, YouTube, so on and so forth. But yeah, brand new season, and it's exciting to be here, but there's just something missing. My man, the only, the hero of the BERcast, Sandy Gallo, the Sandman. Come on, Sandy. Get back in here with me, partner.
Man, that's a hell of an intro.
Right. So, Sandy, back at it, back in the saddle, my partner in crime on the BERcast. It's good to have you back, buddy. I missed you.
Yeah, I missed you too, bud.
Yeah, so, folks, some of you all have missed us. You've said, what is going on with the BERcast? You guys have been gone for several months, and guess what? Life happens. We got businesses to run, and we've got clients to serve here at BER. I know that doesn't sound exciting, but it's the truth. And because of that, we had to take a little bit of a break, but we're back at it. We got a whole new season, and I'm excited in order to jump into it. So, Sandy, I think, obviously the main topic we're going to be talking about the election is going to be, it's going to be interesting to hear what our guests have to say about it. I will just say, no matter how it shakes out, we'll have this conversation here what these fellas have to say. I'm actually feeling pretty optimistic because you know what? I believe in what we're doing here at BER. I believe in the mission behind the work that we do. And I just think that some things sort of transcend politics. I'm political, but I'm also not like ultra, like this politician versus this politician, this cycle versus that cycle. I'm not necessarily like that. And so I'm not sweating bullets in the same way that I thought I was going to be. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
I feel as though I think some of it is overreaction. I think a lot of it could potentially be at risk. But I think for the most part, I think the value proposition, what we do in building performance and all the things that came with the IRA are too great to overlook. And, I'm curious to see the perspective of Curt and Mark coming up, but I feel good about it. I've seen this before and I'll probably see it again in my life. The little tides of change don't necessarily always mean major change when it comes to legislation. I'm optimistic. I'm along with you. I think that we have a great value proposition in what we do. And I find it hard to believe that anybody wants to back out of that investment for the future.
Well, I'll tell you what, my bills are not going down. And I'm not really convinced that just drilling more oil and allowing energy companies to open up the smokestacks more is going to cause my bills to go down. And so I'll tell you what, I am focused as ever on doing the right thing for me and my family and my community because I believe in this stuff. There's a chance we may have to recalibrate our focus, but I guess
Sure.
we'll just have to see. Sometimes a recalibration is for the best. Other things that I'm kind of recalibrating on here for my house and things we may even tease out is Sandy, I want to make some improvements to my own home. And from an energy perspective, I've got a couple of different options that I've been kicking around here. Now, here's the deal. We talked a lot about electrification on season number 1. Some people may have heard a hint of skepticism on our part. Again, that's not the case. We on the BERcast believe in the value of electrification, but I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit of secret, and I think I already teased this in season number 1, but I still have fossil fuels for a lot of my main systems. I still have a
Yeah.
furnace and I still have a gas water heater. And I've been kind of admonished by some people for like, Chris, you're not doing enough. The reality is, I am not sure when I'm going to do that. It does turn out that the Michigan Homes and Here program, the Inflation Reduction Act programs, which have received full funding and ostensibly are therefore not going to be at risk from whatever happens in the politic world moving forward. I could probably get in on that action. I may go ahead with a heat pump water heater, although it seems like to begin with, they're prioritizing those incentives for lower income folks. So I may have to wait my turn for that, and
Yeah.
that's all well and good. So a couple of options I am kicking around right now because I do want to make an improvement is new windows or solar panels. And you may go, those are some interesting choices. Neither of those are kind of the top of order in terms of the things that typically pay for themselves first. Well, here's the deal. I live in a 1920s home, and my windows are almost all original. They have just tons of coats of paint on them. Probably a lot of it's lead paint. They don't work that well, and they're pretty drafty. So, that's kind of the reason why I've been leaning towards windows. I mean, I'll tell you what, Sandy, this is an expensive thing. These are
You
like
bet.
tens of thousands of dollars to do windows. I looked at just calculating the simple payback on them. It's like a 200-year payback or something like that
I'm
on
sure.
these
I'm
windows.
sure.
So it's not exactly something that I'm doing entirely for the energy savings, but perhaps just for the function and form of the windows, the ability to be able to open them and close them.
Sure.
Something my wife definitely would prefer to have. I'll tell you what, though, the more that I've dug in this, the more that I realize that this industry of windows is like,
Bad.
it's all over the place.
Yep.
Bad. Why do you say bad?
I just know so many people have had bad experiences more than anything else. You got to remember, I didn't always live in Florida where everybody's got hurricane windows. I lived in New York on the East End where they were all old houses, and a lot of people had a bad experience with window contractors. The good news is that there are some reputable companies in the industry. Anderson, Renewal by Anderson is one of them. I've never heard really anything bad about them. Just the overall perspective of the industry is there's a lot of questionable players in it. From an installation standpoint, from a quality product standpoint, things like that. You got to be careful.
Yeah, it's crazy because, like, number one, there's just like you go on the NFRC website, there's like 5,000 manufacturers or something like that. So trying to sort through and figure them out, it's like that's hard enough. Then you kind of identify like local reps that you might actually be able to get those windows. That narrows your pool. So, in one way, that's a good thing because it's like it can narrow your focus, but it's kind of bad too because then it's like, well, you kind of reduce your options to a degree. But what I came to realize is there are a lot of windows out there that have good U factor performance, but they're achieving it not necessarily because they're a lot better quality of windows, but because they just have thicker low E coatings on them. And what kills them is visible transmittance. And a lot of people may go,
Mhm.
"Wow, I don't know, that's real nerdy, Chris. I've never even heard of visible transmittance before." But the the thing with visible transmittance is that's how much light you get through the windows, right? And
Mhm.
I live in Detroit and it's already kind of cloudy, to begin with. And so I don't really, and I've got a lot of shade on my property, so I don't really want to like reduce, basically the amount of light that I'm getting through. So I went to go and check out, like, well, how do I even know what my performance on my existing windows are, anyways? I've got by and large single pane wood windows with storm windows on the exterior. How do I even know how those are performing? So I found this cool study from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory on the thermal and optical properties of low E storm windows and panels. And this was kind of cool because I could go in there and find out, like, some laboratory measured values for what is anticipated for different types of windows. So in this chart, this was something that came from like an actual engineering company going and measuring, the actual performance of, sort of a study's worth of these different window typographies. And so, wood double hung windows, single glaze, that's what I got. um, okay, so that's about where my starting point is. I'll say, this thing about the storms, I think that's probably for people who use their storms. Even I, like today, it's November. It hasn't been that cold, as I kind of mentioned. So I haven't even adjusted my storm windows yet to their fully down position. So personally, I
Sure.
think that the true impact of these storms from a U factor standpoint is probably somewhere in between. So maybe instead of an R2, maybe it's like an R1.5 or something like that. That's kind of how I view, my current like thermal consideration. But I'll also say I get a lot of good free gain. So again, I'm in a colder climate, sun shining in. It's heating my house right now because these are clear
Sure.
windows and I can see out them pretty well. I'll tell you what, Sandy, I've been getting a lot of quotes that have like R4 ish type of performance, getting closer to R5 from a U factor. But the SHGC is down to like a zero point 0.2, and the visible transmittance is like zero point 0.3. And people, again, you may
Wow.
just be going, Chris, why do you care about that? I'm like, I want to actually see out of my windows. So anyways, I've been nerding out. I've been going in the NFRC database. I've found that there are some better products out there, but then trying to get like not manufacturers, but installers to
Dollars.
I'm just like, I'm losing faith. I've been like through two or three installers. They're just like, they don't want to put in the work. And so what I've come to realize is like, I feel like in this industry, everybody's just focused on U factor now in order to meet that Energy Star variable. And all they're doing is they're putting these thicker low E coatings on the windows. And that's how they're basically driving down the U factor. I never realized that. I don't know. Did you realize that, Sandy, that just like thicker low E coatings could end up dropping your U factor?
I had heard something about that at another time a long time ago. I can't say I spent as much time as you, but
Oh man, I've been spending
it
so
makes
much time
sense.
on this. If
It
you
makes
believe,
sense, though. I mean, it makes sense.
I don't know. I'm going to keep you posted on what I ultimately choose, but I'll just say, man, my eyes are wider than ever before on if you're a consumer and you're trying to get something better, just how challenging it can actually be sometimes. Sandy, what do you got?
Very
Anything
true.
been kind of catching your eye in the building performance industry about news and updates or anything you're kind of excited about?
Yeah, not a ton. I would say that the buzz has been the political transition and all that. I mean, that's been every conversation I've had here over the last however many weeks has been the same. What's going to happen? What do you think? Where do you think we're going? But nothing overly sticks out beyond that. And I think it's a good conversation. I just hope that our industry is ready to mobilize when we need it to really sell this proposition.
Okay. Right on. Well, with that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and roll into segment two, our guest segment, right now. Okay, we are rolling into segment number two, back here with season two of the BERcast, and we're here to talk about something pretty interesting. As you all probably know, we just had an election. And the outcome of that election could mean that the direction of the building performance industry may shift here, at least temporarily, but possibly more dramatically and for a more sustained period of time based off of the outcome of what kind of policy may come out in the next 4 years. And that's exactly what we're here to talk about. We're here with my colleague, Mark Kresowik, with the American Council for the Energy Efficiency Economy, as well as Curt with NAIMA, the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us on the BERcast.
Thank you,
Good to
Chris.
be here.
Good to see you
So,
guys.
I know Curt from my tenure on the ResNet Board of Directors, and I'm still a ResNet Board Director. And Curt isn't. He filed in his marching papers and said, "I'm done with this." At the last board meeting, anyways, it was time well served, Curt. I'm going to miss you, buddy. You know that. You and I were oftentimes whispering between each other. So, yeah, Curt, what made you decide to move on from the ResNet board?
I think there's a kind of an arc of service. I had been on the board for nearly 9 years, had a great experience, learned about an industry that I didn't know a heck of a lot about when I began my time on the board, and felt it was time to give somebody else an opportunity. Sean Mullins with Owens Corning has replaced me and has that manufacturer's seat on the board. So great experience, no regrets. I'll still be active at ResNet. You guys can't shake me.
Listen to this guy. And then in the show prep, we said, don't feel like you have to be politically correct. And here's Curt being politically correct right out of the gate. But that's all right. I'm going to miss you, buddy. I'm glad that you were there with me, tag team partner on the ResNet board, but I also wish you the best of luck moving forward in the rest of your career. And then Mark, you and I, we barely even know each other. Mark responded to a LinkedIn post that I had made probably about 2 months ago saying, I feel that there's a need for the policy community to engage the boots on the ground practitioner core more when it comes to shaping policy, be it building codes or, different program standards that we may have a touchstone in. We've got organizations like the ACEEE and RMI and the NRDC that are advocates for the work that we do within the building performance sector. Sometimes it's felt like the people who are doing the work aren't necessarily as engaged in that process of crafting policy. And I think there's maybe room for growth and reciprocity on both sides. But either way, Mark responded and said, "Hey, I'm willing to engage." And so it was great. I appreciate you, Mark, for being willing to answer the call and to engage with me. And here you are. You're on the BERcast. So thanks.
No problem. As I always say, my job is to make your wildest policy dreams come true, but I can't do that if I don't know what they are. So my hope is if you want to engage more on the policy front, I'm here to help. Just tell me what it is you want to make happen, and let's go make it happen.
That's great. And Mark, if you could maybe just give a brief description of the organization and what your role is, that'd be great.
Sure. We're the largest nationally focused energy efficiency research and advocacy and technical assistance organization in the United States. So we work at all levels of government across all sectors of the economy, whether that's federal, state, and utility, local, across buildings, transportation, industry. To advance energy efficiency, to help people save energy, save money, lower costs, and ultimately have a safer, healthier, more prosperous economy for all of us, particularly those who have been historically left behind. So I and the organization have two North Stars. One is, again, making sure energy efficiency is delivering everything it needs to do to lower your costs, reduce pollution, and build a more prosperous economy. The other is to prioritize those who have been most energy burdened in our economy, recognizing energy burden, the percentage of income that people spend on energy can be a massive part of their household costs, of their housing costs. The average household maybe spends 3 or 4% of their income on energy, but low income households are spending 9, 10, or even upwards of 20 or 30% of their income on energy. And electricity is one of the most basic fundamental assets to our economy that we have. So we got to make sure people can afford it, that they can keep their lights on, that companies can keep costs low. That's what we're there to do.
Well, I appreciate that. Living here in the great city of Detroit, Michigan, my hometown. I see the energy burden all around me. We have an aging building stock, and we have fairly expensive utility costs, all things considered, particularly for electricity. And, in season number one, Sandy and I had a lot of conversations about the future of electrification and how are we going to pull this off, particularly in a state like Michigan. It's a tricky value proposition, especially when you're dealing with such high cost of electricity. But I appreciate the work that the ACEEE does. And again, Mark, thanks for answering the call. Now, Curt, NAIMA is a trade association for insulation manufacturers, and particularly the fluffy stuff, correct? But more about NAIMA and how does the work that you all do relate to federal policy, if it does at all?
I represent the fiberglass and mineral wool manufacturers in the United States. And like any trade association, we're really kind of policy focused and regulatory focused. So, how does existing regulation impact our member companies? I think what's unique for insulation is that the market for insulation is almost wholly driven by policy. That is energy codes. And so if you don't have states and localities adopting energy codes, our product just doesn't find a market. It doesn't get used. And so we are very focused in the energy code arena. We're also focused at the federal level on incentives that drive building energy efficiency, as well as other federal policies that weigh on our building stock.
Okay. All right. So, Curt, you've been doing this for a long time, right? I mean, you've been involved in the advocacy and policy sector for a number of years. And that's why I have both Curt and Mark on, because they have slightly different perspectives. You have one that's more of a trade association dealing with professionals that are manufacturing insulation, and then their installer core they're off after. And as Curt mentioned, if we don't have a mandate, be it through building codes or programs like incentives or tax credits that may be encouraging buildings to become more energy efficient, then they may not sell as much product as a result. And so that's part of the reason why we've got Curt here, is because, frankly speaking, his membership has a financial incentive in the outcome. And these are some big corporations too. I mean, you're talking about, major manufacturers, Certainty and Owens Corning and other organizations like that. So we're not just talking about green folks that really, only care about the environment and the outcome there, but this is about their businesses and selling products. So, I think that it's going to be interesting to get that perspective. And then Mark, who's more with more of the traditional, I guess, policy advocacy type of perspective to talk about what's going to happen. So let's talk about that, fellas. Let's dive right into it. So we just had an election, and the outcome of the election, I think now I just want to say this: BERcast, we are politically neutral. We have listeners that come from a diverse set of political perspectives. I also think it's important to realize that you can have environmentalists that maybe voted red, and you could have people who don't necessarily care that much about the environment who maybe voted blue. I think it's challenging to try to put people in a box, but I will say that the candidate who won, and not just the candidate, but really the political apparatus of the Republican Party, they kind of ran on a contrarian perspective when it comes to energy and the environment. There is not seemingly a lot of appetite for acknowledging things like anthropogenic climate change and the role that fossil fuel energy consumption plays in that. In fact, we're heading in the opposite direction. We're saying drill, baby, drill. We tapped out. We had actually more fossil fuel production in the United States this last year under Joe Biden than in the history of America, the American economy ever. We're the number one producing fossil fuel economy in the history of the world, but it's still not enough, apparently. And so we're moving to a position seemingly where a lot of the things that I think drive our industry and that we've been talking about from a policy standpoint, things like building codes and federal programs like the Energy Star Homes program or Zero Energy Ready Homes, things like weatherization. Are these things under attack? And then you've got the incentive apparatus and that kind of layered in over the last handful of years with the Inflation Reduction Act. We felt like there was a chance that all of a sudden, us, the building performance industry, we were going to get a slice of that pie, uh, perhaps the biggest slice that we've ever had to really mobilize and catalyze the work that we do. And now I think there's a big question mark about where are we headed? And so I guess I'll just go ahead and kick it off with just a straw poll here. Curt and Mark, are we heading in a really, really dire situation where the whole fabric and infrastructure of what we know as the building performance industry from a federal and policy level, is that really going to be entirely undermined? Or do we think that there's a chance that a lot of that was kind of bluster, and when the sausage really gets made, it may be a little bit more of a middle path? What are you thinking?
Well, let me start with what the American people didn't vote for, right? At the end of the day, Americans didn't vote for higher household costs, right? Like inflation was one of the biggest drivers of what people voted on. And there are people who are facing higher costs than they did 4 years ago, and they voted for lower costs, right? President-elect Trump was out there saying, I'm going to lower your energy bills by 50%. Well, the best way to lower energy bills by 50% is with energy efficiency. The United States is already producing more fossil fuels than it ever has in history. So you're not going to produce more and lower costs, right? Fossil fuel companies don't even want that. They want to higher costs. And so energy efficiency is the best way to deliver on that promise of lower energy costs for households. So I'm optimistic that particularly congressional members, House members, looking at themselves being up for election again in 2 years and seeing what the American households and voters have said that they want lower costs, are going to take a hard look at policies and come back and say, you know what? Policies that lower costs, like energy efficiency, like building codes, like the Inflation Reduction Act incentives for efficient new construction and for efficient new appliances, those things lower costs. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to vote to repeal those incentives because I know that my constituents want lower energy costs, and the best way to do that is energy efficiency.
Okay. Well, all right. So we got an optimistic perspective from someone who's very deep into the policy side of what we do as an industry. Curt, what are you thinking, buddy? You know, at the Resnet board meeting, we talked a little bit of shop about this, and you didn't sound quite as optimistic. How are you feeling?
Well, let's begin by recognizing what a historic 4 years the Biden administration had when it comes to energy efficiency. Just an incredible track record on driving update energy code compliance into federal policies that touch on housing and on commercial construction. Remarkable investments in building energy efficiency through the Inflation Reduction Act. We have a president now coming in who I think is pretty well known that part of his principal aim coming into office is to erase the record of the previous president. We saw that during his first term. And I think he's going to come in, and the Trump administration will come in and be pretty aggressive and try to erase as much as they possibly can of the Biden administration's climate legacy. And we'll have that fight, and we can talk about that today because I think that's kind of a set of policies that are of unique interest to the building performance industry, to my industry. But I will tell you, just kind of my threshold concern coming in is on the two big policy priorities of this new administration. The first is mass deportation. The home building industry is dependent on anywhere from 15 to 25% undocumented labor. That could have a very disruptive impact on labor availability for home construction. And then second, tariffs. President Trump just announced this morning that he's going to add 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada. The supply chain for building products in the United States is heavily dependent on on those two markets. And again, that could be very disruptive, add significant cost to new construction. So those are two of my big threshold concerns, kind of two policy areas that are so big and have such a wide economic impact that I can't really affect that much. So I'm kind of a bystander. But the answer to your question, Chris, is heck yeah, it's going to be pretty disruptive. I think we're in for some rough and wild times.
I don't disagree. I think the Trump administration is going to try and do some of the things that Curt's talking about and roll back policies. But if I'm sitting there as a congressional member looking ahead to my next election, as long as we still have free and fair elections and we're a democracy in this country, and those congressional members are responsive to voters, and I'm looking ahead to my election in 2 years, everything Curt's talking about is true, right? If the Trump administration deports millions of people and increases tariffs, costs are going to go up. And suddenly, I'm going to be the one as a congressional Republican or a congressional House member facing voters again with costs going up even more. I'm going to be worried about getting voted out. And so I'm going to push back on some of those things. I'm going to find ways to deliver lower costs and not go along with some of those proposals because I don't want to be the incumbent sitting there as households or even when voters are even more mad about increased costs. So I'm going to find those things and I'm going to push back because I don't want to be facing voters in 2 years with higher costs, even more so than they are now.
Yeah, and fellas, I really appreciate you kind of driving back to some basics. I was going to get into more pithy, like, what about the EPA and the DOE? And we'll get to there. But, I'm glad that you kind of focused on maybe some of the basics because, Sandy, you and I were talking about this, right?
This is almost like a replay, right? So I just so happened to be sitting in the 2016 election. I don't want to say any exact names, but at a national conference, and the news came through in the middle of the conference that, President-elect Trump was going to be the next president. And, it was like it was somewhere in between attending a funeral and, a mass, like, self-mortification thing. I mean, everybody was like, we're not even going to be here in January. And everybody's going on and on and on. Now, I tell that story for one reason, is that nothing was affected on the energy efficiency side at all. So there was some regulatory pressure and places like the EPA where they did cut some regulatory matters. So look, in the end, I can remember this as clear as yesterday, was that they came back and said, there's too much value in these programs to cut them. I find it hard to believe that Congress, and as Mark pointed out, very good point, that the anybody's going to let their constituents over these programs that do a lot of good. I don't see how they get away with just slashing and dashing. I don't see it. I mean, you could make a stronger argument today, no matter what your political affiliation is. To me, energy efficiency is probably one of the most conservative things that you could have. What's a conservative, right? We conserve, right? Well, I shouldn't say we, but they, right? I think we need to take a rest a little bit on this and just see what happens. I'm not going to say that I don't think that some of this stuff may be affected, but I think a lot of it, there's so much quality and so much quantity and so much proof that it's going to be hard to retract a lot of that.
So, Sandy, this is where I'm going to push back on you. Number one, I think President Trump, this administration, he'll have folks who are more disruptive. And so I don't want to call it a mandate, but I think a desire to be more disruptive than the first Trump administration. And second, because they've got to pass a bill to restore or re-up the Trump tax credits, they're going to move very quickly in the first few months of the new administration to pass a mammoth package that includes not only tax provisions, but also includes provisions dealing with energy, healthcare, and other administration priorities. And they're going to do it under kind of special Senate rules referred to as reconciliation that allow them to pass a bill with 50 votes. And I think they're going to try and be aggressive, and they're going to target a lot of the programs that we care about. So they have the potential to be very aggressive. Now, back to Mark's point, it's our job the industries negatively impacted by those sorts of policy proposals to push back, to show that these policies, these programs have value, that they have local impact, that they support local industries, uh, and are in the public interest. Look, I think we're at high risk, but we have a job to do. And so we just need to be mission focused the next few months on making sure this administration and, more importantly, members of Congress hear our side of the story.
You were asking about those specifics, Chris, right? So Kurt's exactly right, right? Budget reconciliation as a tool is going to be the first thing that congressional Republicans try and take on. And one of the things that was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act was the 45L tax credit for home builders. So home builders get a tax credit for, building to Energy Star or zero energy ready home levels. So adding more insulation, building better appliances. Um, and there are home builders who have now moved their entire production lines to that approach. Big major home builders that are only building homes now that meet those standards. And they've been able to do it at essentially no increased cost to home buyers because of those tax credits, right? And so, let's take that as an example and say, in those districts where those home builders are building homes, where they're producing homes, are representatives in those districts going to want to say to home buyers, I'm increasing your costs by $4,500 to buy a new home, that's just because of something the Trump administration is trying to do? I sure hope not, right? Those are, congressional members that are going to be facing those questions, and great folks who are doing the right things and building homes at lower costs and retrofitting homes by putting in more insulation and upgrading appliances, saying, hey, we're able to do this. We're lowering household costs. Like, don't make our jobs harder. As Kurt's saying, we've just got to elevate those voices and make sure they're the ones being heard in this discussion, because that's the reality of what's happening. Program implementers like yourselves are making those things possible for households across this country because of the programs that have been put in place for the last few years. We can't roll those back.
I think the 45L tax credit is the least at jeopardy. I mean, the home building lobby in Washington is so strong, and it's been around a long time. I just find it hard to believe that they would. I think that's the least at jeopardy in my opinion.
It seemed like you felt like the 45L was going to be pretty hard to roll back. Are you still feeling that way, or do you have any concerns that it also could be susceptible?
I have fundamentally changed my opinion, Chris. I've had recent conversations that make me doubt that the home builders will be strong advocates at this point for continuing the credit in its current form.
Wow.
There are some pretty persuasive voices who are saying that meeting the 2021 IECC or even the 2024 IECC requirements, which are part of Energy Star, it's cost prohibitive, and the industry's just not looking to the 45L credit going forward. This is just to underscore kind of table stakes for the building performance industry. There are other very politically powerful voices within the home builder industry who will talk to the Republicans on Capitol Hill and to the administration and say, just roll back the 45L credit to how it originally operated, which means roll it back to the threshold requirement was meeting a standard. It was pretty convoluted, but it was 50% more efficient than the 2006 IECC, with an increment of that increased efficiency going to building envelope. For the building performance industry, the new credit being tied to Energy Star means that every home that qualifies for the 45L credit requires a rating. If you roll this credit back to the old standard, ratings aren't required to meet that 45L credit. It might not be as lucrative for home builders, but it's a freebie.
That's really interesting. So, for those who are maybe newer to the industry and don't know the history, like Sandy mentioned, the credit originally came out in 2005 as part of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. And per Kurt's description, it was basically a savings versus an energy code baseline. And I will say, for my beginning of my career, it sort of was implied as if you essentially had to do a rating. Technically, you didn't have to do one, but it was supposed to be done by a certified professional, and essentially, it implied that it was everything but being an actual HERS rating. And so, in a lot of ways, it was treated like that. Towards the tail end of the legacy tax credit, it kind of became a little bit more of a churn and burn and kind of a self-reporting apparatus in a lot of ways. And so it sounds like what you're saying, Curt, is that it's not necessarily that the 45L would go away, but it's that it gets fundamentally watered down to a point where it no longer is particularly beneficial to the building performance practitioners, the HERS raters. And for your industry, there's a potential that all of a sudden, people are not having to insulate buildings as much in order to get to that point. Mark, do you share any concern about the 45L and its current construction?
Certainly, I'm concerned, and that's where I think highlighting the benefits of exactly the impacts that 45L is having for home builders and for consumers in these districts is critical, right? It's raising the voices of people who can clearly and credibly say the existence of that policy as it's currently constructed lowers costs for home buyers. It lowers costs on an upfront basis and an ongoing basis. And if you roll that back, you're going to get tagged with increasing costs to your constituents, right? That is the message that needs to be heard and reinforced by folks like yourselves and throughout the industry. That's the voice that's got to be elevated to break through the disinformation and misinformation that is pervasive in social media and some media outlets, right? That's what we've got to do in congressional districts, is be able to say, here are the benefits of these policies to constituents in your district. You don't want to be on the hook for raising their costs in 2 years. That's the message that's got to resonate. Take some of the other policies that exist, home energy rebates and funding for home energy rebates. A lot of that money's gone out already and is out the door to more progressive states that were ready and moving faster. And it's actually the more conservative states that are still getting their applications in. And is the administration going to say to Texas and Oklahoma, guess what? New York got money, but sorry, Oklahoma, you're not going to get money. Is that really the approach they want to take? Maybe, but I certainly expect, some governors in those states and energy offices in those states to push back and say, no, give us this money still. We have put together this great program. It's going to lower costs for our consumers. And hey, as a governor, I'm up for election in, say, 2 years or even, and I don't want to be facing voters not delivering on programs that can lower their costs, given what voters have just said in this election. So I think it's going to be a challenge. There's no question the Trump administration is going to try and do some of the things Curt's saying. And, I think there's a credible path to not doing those things and delivering for what voters really want.
But, Sandy, back to your original this is a builder credit. Surely the builders, they're politically powerful. They'll take care of this. We can't assume that they will. ResNet needs to have all hands on deck in activating the building performance industry, and they need to be lobbying for this. Maintaining the 45L credit is their top priority, and they need to lobby like they've never lobbied before. And, I hope Steve and the crew are thinking about this and putting a battle plan together.
Yeah, I thought that I was part of the ResNet lobbying efforts last year, and it was good. It was a really good effort, and I think I agree with you. I think we need to really enhance that. I just want to clarify that I'm not concerned. I'm just going by past performance, but I am concerned about a lot of other parts of this, like workforce development and things that mean a lot to our industry, training code officials and advancing code. You're right. There's a lot more to it than just this. This is like one of the bigger chunks and more outwardly facing parts of it. I do have concerns, and I think it's a lot easier to say, well, if we don't have to implement 45L tax credits everywhere, we don't need workforce development, and just cut it. I think that's what concerns me. It's like all these other programs, the homes program, and all these things that you and Mark both talk about.
So another thing that you and I talked about, Curt, when we were together at the board meeting, and Mark, you just touched on. So this is the status of the implementation of the home energy rebate program. And for those who aren't aware, this is something that, Sandy and I touched on in season number 1, which came out of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so basically, the way that this program, the Homes program, and then its companion, the HERE program, which is more focused on electrification of homes, the Inflation Reduction Act created a mechanism for these two programs to exist. And then basically, the DOE was to essentially hand out the money for states that applied for it, and the states were to implement their own programs. And so you can see here on this map the status, and we can see that rebates are available in not every state, but in a lot of them. We've got probably, I don't know, a quarter of states that are either there or their applications are approved, and so they'll be there. And then we've got even more, probably, over 50% of the states that have applications submitted. And there's only one, South Dakota, that basically said, stuff it, we don't want to have anything to do with this. We're not even going to submit an application. So even places like, take South Carolina, they've prepared an initial application saying that they want to get in on this. They just haven't kind of gone forward with the full thing yet. So going back to Mark's point, so we've got, Michigan, Wisconsin, New York. We got a bunch of states that already have the money, and then a bunch that are seemingly right on the precipice. Is it likely or plausible that all of a sudden we're just going to say, sorry, Texas, sorry, Florida, sorry, Missouri, you submitted this application, but we're not going to give the money out to you. Guess what? Virginia and Nevada, if you catch up and you finally get yours in, we're just going to say, nope, sorry, the door is closed. Mark, you sounds like you're dubious of that. You think that overall, it's going to take some lobbying, and it's going to take proactive communication from our membership within the building performance industry to basically, ensure that this doesn't get rolled back. But it sounds like you have a kernel of hope that these programs will ultimately come out as being viewed as being positive for all participants throughout the country. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with a lot of the Southeast states and thinking about their applications, and the Republican governors and state energy offices in those states have put time and resources into figuring out, working with their stakeholders to figure out what to do with this money and how best to lower costs. And so, will some parts of the Trump administration try to roll back these funds and not give them out to states that don't already have the funds? Maybe, but I am hopeful that Republican governors and congressional officials and other stakeholders in the states that don't have the money yet say, no, like, we've been counting on this money. We've built our state budget in part around, part of this money coming in, and we know it's going to deliver the kinds of benefits we want to deliver for our constituents. We're facing those constituents and are up for election in 2 years. No, give me the money. Move it out the door. It's going to have an impact, and it's going to lower people's costs.
Think about places like West Virginia. I was there teaching an energy code training. Believe it or not, West Virginia has an energy code. We did a podcast episode last year talking about this. But look, West Virginia has a lot of poverty, and people's bills have been going up. And so the energy burden is felt by people there. The idea that we're going to all of a sudden pull back on a way to help to leverage getting people some real assistance in improving their household economy by improving the performance of their homes, I just don't see how that's in the benefit of anybody. Sandy, you and I talked about this, of all things about the Inflation Reduction Act, these homes rebates, I would like to believe that they're the least contentious elements of the Inflation Reduction Act. Are you still feeling that, Sandy? Are you still feeling like this is something that has momentum?
I think it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. You know what I mean? But it's like, I think, except for South Dakota's never going to get funds. I think it's going to be hard to unwind this at this point. Curt has a different opinion. It's kind of like I feel about 45L2 now. I didn't hear the part about them talking about, and being for rolling it back. So I learned something very valuable from you today, Curt. I appreciate that, because I had not heard that. I'm pretty confident that these types of programs in some form of 45L, I guess now I have to say, I got to think about this whole thing, that will still exist. But, overall, I think that, almost 50% of the states have approved applications, got the money ready. It's going to be hard to say to the other 50% no.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a hard thing to sell.
And take it to another policy. Chris, you mentioned appliance standards near the beginning of this conversation. The appliance standards that have been finalized under the Biden administration are saving households $200, every single household, the average household in America, $200 a year, right? And one of the nice things about the appliance standard law is you actually can't roll them back. There's an anti-backsliding provision in the law that you can't weaken that standard. You can't go back to the standard to anything weaker than the standard that's currently in place. Now, is there going to be an attempt to change that law or change the amount of time that you have to look back and update those standards? Probably, but again, unless they get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, that's not something you can do in budget reconciliation, right? It's got to have a budget impact or you can't do it. And I think there are members of the House facing election in 2 years that are going to have to look and say, is rolling back something that's saving my constituents $200 a year the right thing to do for my future political prospects? And again, I'm hopeful that no, they're going to recognize the benefits here.
Look, the great thing about podcasts is you've got a permanent record. So when you've got a guest that comes on the show and makes some wild-eyed prediction and it doesn't come true, you can call them on it at a later date. But if I'm looking into my crystal ball, within the first week following the swearing in, the White House will send a memo to every federal agency. They will stop the disbursement of any funds related to the IRA going out to states or to grantees. All of that money will be frozen. Within the first month, the House of Representatives will introduce a reconciliation package. Included in that package will be language that rescinds most of the IRA programs, including the rebate program. So, number one, the Biden administration needs to get busy and get final contracts with as many states as they possibly can by January 20th and get money out the door. If money is in the bank accounts of those states to run those programs, the administration can't touch it. The problem is, once you've entered into a contract, not all of that money will be released. Some will still be in the DOE bank account, which then kind of sets up a legal issue between the states and the administration. The administration will claim authority to be able to impound that money, notwithstanding a binding contract, which leaves the states with a decision. Do we sue for that money? Or do we just take a pass and say, all right, we're going to kind of relinquish the right and have a rebate program that wasn't as well funded or robust as we had hoped for? That's what's going to happen if we don't kind of have big constituencies arguing for the rebates. So again, that's our future. How do you bend the future in the direction of industries and individuals and communities that care about energy efficiency?
Kurt's exactly right?
Yeah.
I totally agree that is exactly what's going to happen. And my question is, how are we going to keep that from sticking, right? That the states actually do step up and say, no, we want that money. We're going to challenge you. We're going to get that money. I'd say the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, one of the biggest pots of money out there to support stuff like this, is already in escrow, right? It's already been obligated. It's out the door. And so, that's relatively safe. But I think Kurt's right. And I think the budget reconciliation is going to try and move quickly. And so it's a matter of us sending that message, our constituencies sending that message, again, and particularly for congressional members. You're going to be facing in voters 2 years. Do you want those decisions of the Trump administration to stick, or do you want that money to flow? Do you want these incentives to be continued so that household costs are lower, especially in the face of other things that might happen, like tariffs, like deportations? Do you want to be facing voters in 2 years with significantly higher household costs or lower household costs, given what voters have just said in this election, how they feel about being less financially secure than they were 4 years ago or 2 years from now?
Yeah, part of it was about challenging the agenda, of the Biden administration. But there may be an agenda ultimately that is behind the doctrine of the Trump administration and really what the Republican Party is really ran on. Some people believe that policy piece has already been out there in plain sight. The Project 2025, if you all haven't heard of it before, is what a lot of people believe to be a conservative, basically playbook for how the administration should go about reshaping the relationship between the American public and the federal government moving forward in 2025. And Mark, this comes straight from the ACEEE. Project 2025 reprises the effort to eliminate weatherization. Weatherization could be under attack. And so this is the Project 2025 document. And if we go to just search for energy efficiency, it talks about reallocating the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy potentially under the national energy security apparatus. And, at first blush, you might go, okay, I mean, that sounds fine, I guess. We're reallocating it, we're going to put it in a different place. But then if you keep searching in the document, then it talks about essentially taking that Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and essentially eliminating it. That would be the best case scenario. Just get rid of it. So any programs associated with energy efficiency and renewable energy, just get rid of it. Well, if we can't get rid of it, let's reduce it. Or if we can't reduce it, then let's just focus on fundamental science.
And each of the things that you see here have to go through Congress, right? And as you said, there's reprising efforts in that they've tried before, and Congress rebuffed them, right? And this is the question. Like, I have tremendous faith in democracy and the American people and what voters have said. So as long as we have a functional democracy, which I will say is, to me, the biggest threat here is that we don't have a functional democracy going forward. And so as long as we have a functional democracy, I think the American voters have said they want lower costs. They want to avoid and reduce the worst impacts of climate disruption. And so if I'm facing voters in 2 years, I've got to do something to deliver on that front, or they're going to kick me out exactly the same way they just kicked the Biden administration out.
Yeah. Look, so that goes back to your point, Sandy. You're not exactly skeptical that the worst case outcome could happen, but you're also feeling a little bit optimistic that despite the fact that might be the agenda, that really when the sausage gets made, it's going to be some kind of middle path. After having this conversation and everything, Sandy, how are you feeling? You still feel pretty good about that, or are you more concerned?
I don't know. Curt just struck some fear in me. I'll be honest. And I respect his opinion and his insight. So obviously, Curt and I known each other well before the board, and then the time I spent on the board. Mm-hmm. I still feel like, I think there's things at jeopardy. I do. I don't. Again, I restated what I said. I said I don't think everything's safe. I'm hopeful that a common sense approach will happen. I don't really have a political ball in this game because I really don't like any politicians. I'm an independent my whole life, so that thus independent thinker. I do think that we do have to mobilize as an industry. I don't think we can just sit back and let this happen. I think it's imperative. I think Kurt's points were spot on. ResNet needs to get super uber aggressive, and I think where this gets sold, and Curt is spot on again, and so is Mark, and that's to the congressman. We have to be able to convince these people and show them, and we can prove it to them, that these programs are worthwhile and equitable and a good investment. And if we don't do that, then there's a good chance, I think, that some of this is going to fail.
Yeah, Curt, what do you think?
Programs and all of this funding, and I'm not going to defend all of the different offices at the Department of Energy. Hell, I think we could probably shrink government by a good amount, and that's not going to be my focus. What is going to be my focus is in two very kind of discrete areas. The first is on tax credits. We have in the entire Internal Revenue Code, out of the thousands of provisions, we have 3 credits designated to energy efficiency. A credit that goes to homeowners who want to retrofit their house, a credit to builders who want to build a better house, and a credit to commercial building owners or lessees who want to build or retrofit more efficient commercial buildings. Those credits all have a great track record. They have an incredible return on investment, and they should be maintained. The second area that I'm going to focus is federal government. If you are going to invest in buildings, in housing stock in some way, a component of that federal investment should be requiring that that house be built to modern energy codes, that it is energy efficient, that it's more resilient, is better to withstand extreme weather. That means if you've got federal mortgages that you are using to purchase new homes, modern energy code requirements should attach to those federal mortgages. If you have FEMA funding that's going to rebuilding homes and communities after natural disasters, that rebuilding effort should be to modern energy code standards. Those are kind of my two North Stars going into this new administration and new Congress. I want to protect those programs. I want to protect those incentives. Everything else is noise. All of this other crap is noise. I think that's what we need to do as an industry, is really pick our battles and know what we need to save, know what we need to stand for.
And I think about this like a Detroit
Mark,
Lions.
well
I
said.
think about this like a Detroit Lions fan, right? So we're talking. I was born in Ann Arbor. My family's from Detroit, right? So, we've been through some really rough years, right? And I am optimistic that over the course of the next few months, is it going to be rough? Are we going to suffer through some injuries? Are we going to lose Aiden Hutchinson, right? Like, are we going to have some real problems? Yes, but at the end of the day, we're going to win that damn Super Bowl. And that Super Bowl, as Curt's saying, is lower household energy costs. It's more resilient homes that can withstand the extreme weather and climate risks that we're seeing. We're going to get there. It's going to be rough, right? But we've built the roster the way it needs to be built. We've got a plan to make it happen. It's going to happen.
Okay. Well, that's a really reassuring and a call to action. What I'm hearing from our guests is plan for the worst, but be prepared in order to present the best of who we are. I will reiterate, and I've said this before, we are a business. We are an industry, and we're not just here as environmental justice warriors. We are here as contractors, consultants, architects, engineers. We are an industry. We're doing valuable work. And I think that there is a way for us to be able to assert our relevance that is apolitical. And that is our goal. And that's our call to arms, our call to action here. We will keep you all posted on the BERcast as things develop. But for now, I really appreciate our guests coming on. Curt, thanks for coming out of quasi-retirement. I mean, I know you're not really retired, but you retired from the board. So thanks for coming out and still hanging out with your good buddy, Chris Mack. Mark, thanks for being an advocate there on the policy sector and being willing to deal with tough guys like me who want to rough up the policy community sometimes. We're going to need each other here, okay? Mark, I need you. I need the ACEEE. And I'd say you all need us too. Let's all work together in order to preserve the best of what we have going forward. Thank you all again for joining us. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Great conversation,
Thanks,
guys.
Chris.
Sandman, segment number 3, everybody's favorite sports talks. We got Lions, we got Tigers, and we got the Bear here rapping about sports. We'll probably go into some more serious or maybe philosophical things at some point, maybe after football season ends. But for right now, I got a lot to feel good about. My Lions are 10-1. They are at the head of the NFC. We're heading into a big matchup with the Chicago Bears on Thanksgiving. You all will have this episode drop by the time that happens. I ain't worried about those Bears. They always seem to play us harder than what I would prefer. But I think the Lions got embarrassed the last couple of years
They
on
have
Thanksgiving.
nothing for this. They have nothing for the Lions, man. Sorry.
Okay, well, I certainly hope so. The Lions, you could say they're probably primed for a letdown game, but I'm hoping not against the Bears on Thanksgiving. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, am I right to be this excited about my Detroit Lions?
They're the best team in the NFL. And yes, I put them over Kansas City and, many other teams. They're by far the best team in the NFL. They're probably one of the most complete teams I've seen in a long time. We've had a lot of Super Bowl champions that were great on offense, but they were okay defenses. We've had some Super Bowl champions that were great defenses, but they were okay on offense. The Lions got both, and they're playing at a high level on both sides of the ball. Is their defense perfect? No, but it's pretty damn good. And their offense is just a machine. So I would say that. And the thing I like the most about the Lions is they can beat you any way you want. You want to shut down the pass, we're going to give you the run. Like they just pound you to death. And it's funny because Dan Campbell predicted all this when he took over, and everybody's like, "Yeah, this guy's crazy. He might not be fit to be a." Well, he's delivered. So I'm excited for the Lions. I don't have much to be excited for on my side.
Now, look, you had a good baseball season. You had the Mets that went.
And the Mets are loading up, man. I don't know if you've been paying attention to free agency, but the Mets are loading up.
Well, I'm excited for them. My Detroit Tigers, they had a historic run. They had a 0.8% chance of making the playoffs at the beginning of August, and ended up shocking everybody to make not only the playoffs, but actually, to get to the ALDS. And didn't make it beyond that, but that's okay. We'll take it.
Hell yeah.
The Pistons are starting to show a little bit of signs of life. They're not perfect, but you got your New York Knickerbockers. They did okay last time we spoke to you. It turns out that the Knicks, they gave it a good little run there, and they're looking even better this season. So, are you at least excited about your other team, Sandy?
I am. I'm excited for baseball season, especially. I can't wait for this year's Mets to see what they evolve into. I think we're making all the right moves. And, the Knicks, last year I was traveling during the playoffs when they lost, but, they had a good run, and they will be better this year. So, yeah, overall, I'm excited. I'm just a little disappointed about this whole debacle with the Giants. They let go Daniel Jones. You watch, he's going to get picked up by another team, one of these playoff teams, and the main quarterback's going to go down. He's going to come in and win a game. And that's going to stab me right in the heart. But you know what? I fault general manager and the coach. They came in to fix the offensive line. They've never fixed it. Daniel Jones and everybody else is just getting killed. Saquon, imagine how great. You look at Saquon Barkley now with the Eagles. How great would a Saquon Barkley have been with the Giants if he would have had an offensive line? And he was already great. So it's that whole place needs to be like kicked out and rebooted. And I have a feeling it's going to happen, and I have a feeling it's going to be some years before we're good again.
Well, I wish I could say I feel your pain, but you know what, Sandy? The Lions haven't even sniffed a championship since the 1950s. And so you don't even understand the depth of my pain as a Detroit Lions fan. We have been the laughingstock of all of professional sports for so long. And so I am reveling in this moment. And here's the cool thing. What did I say last season? Sometimes you just got to take the points. We have a kicker. Probably
can actually kick.
We have a kicker who can kick. He possibly has the biggest, most accurate leg in the whole game. 16 for 16 on field goals this season. I think a long of 58. And honestly, these ones have been going from long 50s. They look like they could be going from long 60s. So I'm feeling pretty good. We got the two runners. We got a couple good receivers. We got Jared Goff. Everybody's chanting his name. The defense has been looking arguably better and better every week, despite the fact that we've been losing players.
And the pickups from the Browns, that was a great pickup. And he so far played really well. I don't see any holes, man. I don't see any holes.
Are we going to lose a game for the rest of the season? Where do you think our stumbling block is? I think the Bills could trip us up. You have a mobile quarterback. We sometimes struggle with mobile.
That's the second best team in the league, by the way.
Sister cities to Detroit. If Buffalo and Detroit met in the Super Bowl, the nation would probably yawn, but I would be perfectly excited to have that. I think most people are ready to move on from Kansas City, so maybe they would welcome the Bills ultimately.
I agree. And I think a Bills-Lions battle would be awesome. But to me, that would be like poetic justice, So I'd love to see that.
We got to play outside.
It's all right, man. It's football.
That's what I'm saying. Those Lions, we got to do it outside in February. All right, Sandy. Well, you know what? It's good to have you back again. We're going to go ahead
Good
and
to
put a
be
bow
back.
on this episode, and we'll be back very soon with episode 2 of season 2 of the BERcast, and we'll talk to y'all then. Stay safe. Have a happy holiday.